When you scroll past a political post, a sponsored video, or a perfectly engineered headline, who do you think it's designed for? Not you. You're watching with awareness. You see the framing. You recognize the emotional hook. It's everyone else who falls for it. The angry ones. The desperate ones. The people who don't think critically. And that quiet confidence, that feeling of standing above the noise, feels like proof that you're in control. But what if that feeling is the first crack? What if the moment you believe you're immune is the moment persuasion stops needing your permission? Psychologists have spent decades studying this exact illusion. They call it the third-person effect, a cognitive bias where individuals consistently believe that media, messaging, and persuasion influence other people far more than they influence themselves. And here's the disturbing mystery at the heart of it. Why does the human mind cling so fiercely to the belief that others are manipulated, while it quietly edits out its own vulnerability? The third-person effect was formally identified in the early 1980s, but its roots are ancient. Long before algorithms, propaganda posters, or mass media, humans survived by belonging to groups and believing their own group was wiser than the rest. That instinct never disappeared. It evolved. When modern researchers first tested the third-person effect, they expected mild bias. What they found instead was extreme. Participants believed persuasive messages had little to no effect on them, but a strong, even dangerous effect on others. And this belief appeared across education levels, intelligence, political ideology, and culture. In other words, awareness did not protect people. It empowered the illusion. The brain doesn't just want to feel smart. It wants to feel autonomous. To admit influence is to admit that your beliefs, your values, your identity can be shaped from the outside. That idea threatens something fundamental. So the mind creates psychological distance. It tells a story where you are the observer and they are the subject. You watch manipulation happen. Others experience it, and that separation feels like safety. The third-person effect isn't arrogance, it's protection. Neuroscience shows that when people are confronted with the idea that they might be influenced, the brain reacts similarly to physical threat. The amygdala activates and stress responses rise, defensive reasoning takes over. Why? Because influence threatens agency. And agency is survival. Your sense of self is built on the belief that your thoughts are yours, chosen through logic and experience, not installed through repetition or emotional pressure. Psychologists call this self-enhancement bias, the tendency to view oneself as more rational, informed, and resistant to error than others. It's statistically impossible, but psychologically necessary. Without it, confidence collapses, decision-making freezes. So the brain lies just enough to keep you functional, but that lie has consequences. Believing you're immune lowers your guard. It reduces skepticism. It shifts scrutiny outward. You don't analyze why a message resonates with you. You analyze who else it might corrupt, and that's where persuasion slips in unnoticed. Here's the most disturbing part. The third-person effect isn't something a few people experience. It's something almost everyone agrees on, silently. In studies involving political ads, misinformation, and social influence, opposing groups reached the same conclusion. The messages were powerful. They were dangerous. They were influencing people. Just not them. Each side saw the other as manipulated, emotional, misled. And once that belief takes hold, something darker emerges. Disagreement stops being intellectual, it becomes moral. If they believe what they believe because they're manipulated, then you don't need to understand them. You just need to resist them. And that belief, more than any message, shapes behavior. The third-person effect doesn't just distort perception, it reshapes behavior. Once the brain decides you are less influenced than others, it begins acting on that belief. You stop questioning why a message feels right. You stop examining emotional reactions. You assume your agreement comes from logic. This is where persuasion becomes invisible. Advertisers, political strategists, and media architects understand this deeply. They don't target people who feel gullible. They target people who feel above influence. Messages are framed not as persuasion, but as confirmation. You already know this. You're one of the smart ones. Unlike most people, you can see the truth. And your brain responds instantly. Because it doesn't feel like influence, it feels like recognition. The third-person effect doesn't make you resistant to persuasion. It makes persuasion adaptive. In one revealing study, participants were shown the same controversial media content. Researchers then asked 2 questions. 1. How much does this influence you? 2. How much does this influence others? The result was consistent and disturbing. Participants rated themselves as minimally affected, but believed the content had a strong influence on the average person. Then came the twist. When asked whether the content should be censored, regulated, or controlled, those same participants supported restrictions. Why? Because they believed others couldn't handle it. This is the hidden power of the third-person effect. It doesn't just blind you to influence. It convinces you that you should decide what others are allowed to see. History is filled with this logic. Every group believes they're the exception. Every ideology believes it's immune. Every movement believes it sees clearly while others are misled. And the brain rewards that belief with moral certainty. Here's a truth that feels almost offensive. The more intelligent someone believes they are, the stronger the third-person effect becomes. Education increases awareness of bias, but also increases confidence in self-detection. You learn about propaganda, you learn about manipulation, you learn about psychology, and slowly a dangerous conclusion forms. If I understand these tricks, they can't work on me. But persuasion doesn't rely on ignorance. It relies on identity. You don't accept messages because you fail to analyze them. You accept them because they align with who you think you are. The smartest minds aren't the hardest to manipulate. They're the ones persuasion must flatter first. You might not think you're brainwashed, but consider this. Have you ever believed ads manipulate other people, but your purchases are practical? Social media distorts reality, but you use it wisely. News headlines mislead, but you can tell what's exaggerated. Influencers control opinions, but you're just observing. That separation, that subtle "I'm different," is the third-person effect in action. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It quietly tells you that influence always happens outside your mind. And because of that, you rarely ask the most important question: why did this idea feel right to me? Instead, you ask, why do they believe this? That shift changes everything, because influence doesn't require agreement. It only requires unquestioned resonance. The third-person effect is only the surface. Beneath it are biases that rewrite memory, biases that defend beliefs long after evidence collapses, biases that make you feel logical while acting emotionally. And some of them are far more invasive. They don't just influence what you think, they influence what you refuse to question. Because the most powerful form of control isn't convincing you of a lie, it's convincing you that you're incapable of being fooled. And that is why you need to watch the next videos.